Welcome to the Full Funnel B2B Marketing podcast. And today we have our guest, Jonathan Bland, live. And he has been working at sales and marketing functions for B2B SaaS companies for more than 10 years. And now he's running his own demand generation agency called OmniLab. And what they do is they help B2B SaaS companies align marketing with revenue, remove the friction from the sales funnel, and optimize for what's actually going on in the CRM instead of just optimizing for ads. And so I'm so excited to have Jonathan here today because we are going to be discussing some really interesting case study. Jonathan, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Awesome. So let's just dive in. Like I mentioned, we have actually two different case studies that we wanted to discuss. And, just to kick it off, could you please share what kind of outcomes people can expect from a well-executed B2B demand generation program? Maybe the case study and the results that you had recently?
Yeah. So I guess for a little bit of context about this first one that we're going to talk about. So you and I chatted about this before, but this is a company that initially was, at least as we started with them about 8 months ago, they were a seed stage company, ACV roughly 8K or so, very big TAM. So they had a lot of different people that they could go after. Fairly broad audience, complex, not too complex. They're probably kind of right in the middle. But essentially what people can expect with a good demand gen program is they should expect that ultimately you're driving more inbound demo requests, assuming it's a sales-led motion, more marketing source pipeline, and then more marketing source revenue. Ultimately, those are the three things that I'm looking at. Obviously, there's some other lagging indicators that we can get into a little bit later, especially that we tracked, especially for this, this case study that I'm going to be kind of talking about a little bit. But those are really the key things that we need to be talking about. My salon, I just lost a video on you guys. Oh, there you are.
I think you're fine. I was just sharing the intro screen when we were starting. So,
yeah,
you mentioned the case study. Can you share the main results that you got out of it?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing and like why everyone's probably even on this call is that we were talking about, how we doubled marketing's contribution to revenue, and marketing's contribution to revenue is marketing sourced pipeline and ultimately revenue. And where they were before is around 30% of essentially revenue was sourced from marketing. And then we grew that to about 66%. And it still seems to be growing to this date. And that's over a time period of about 6 months. Awesome. So it's been honestly incredible. I mean, it's probably one of our most successful clients. Of course, we can't take complete credit for it, right? Everyone on this call knows that this is also about having a great product and a team behind it. But when you've got good marketing that aligns, you're going after the right people with the right messaging and positioning, and ultimately the right channels, that, you can really do this over time. And it's not something that, that's just, things that people say on LinkedIn. So.
All right. So I'm really now curious to know about exactly what you did. So could you take us through the different steps of this campaign from the beginning, or the program as how you set it up, and what are the main milestones and steps that you have taken?
Yeah. And I think that, honestly, some of this boils down to some of the simple stuff that you really need to do from the absolute beginning, right? And it starts with making sure that you have the right target customer in mind that you're actually going after. One of the biggest mistakes I see B2B SaaS companies making is they've got too broad an audience and they're trying to hit everyone and ultimately capture as many leads. And a lot of times that's content downloads on Facebook and LinkedIn. But ultimately you need to be going after the right people. Now, if you're in a good position, you really understand your customer deeply, you've got a clear ICP and you know exactly who you want to go after. So that was the first thing that we did. And we have a pretty clear, onboarding process that allows us to understand a lot about the customer, from the clients that we work with. So that's the first thing that we did, is make sure we got a clear, concise view of what we were actually going after, updated a lot of things in the back end, because originally when we started working with them, they had very broad firmographic-based targeting across ad channels. So we immediately started defining that a lot more, making sure that we're going after the right people and spending their dollars in the right way. Another point just to mention too is the reason that's also so important is when you're an early stage B2B SaaS company. At the time they started working with us, they were seed. Now they're Series A, raised about $25 million. Going for their Series B probably later this year or next year. But another important point of this is that when you've got a limited amount of ad spend, you can't go after everyone and expect to get the frequency that you're looking for. So these guys were spending around $10,000 to $15,000 per month, not really a big budget for most B2B SaaS companies. So again, very important that you've got that locked in. The next thing is really making sure we've got messaging and positioning locked in. So if you don't have a good message to resonate with the audience, you're not going to be successful. What we do internally, this might be practical for some folks, and I maybe can share this in a spreadsheet or something afterwards, but what we do is we have essentially a featured outcome messaging doc of which we ask our clients to fill out. So there's kind of like broad-based like value prop messaging at the company level. But then what we do is we try to break it down from a product marketing perspective to understand feature by feature. What is the function of that feature? What do people want and desire and need out of that feature from their perspective? So that's not usually something technical. That's ultimately the outcome that they're driving. And then that leads to the business outcomes that they want out of that specific feature. So what we can do with that then is then layer, whether it be content and or positioning statements across paid social channels and other channels to make sure that our copy, landing pages, and everything kind of aligns. Another thing too, and stop me if you have any questions on here, I'm just kind of going through kind of the process, but another aspect that we really spent a lot of time on is making sure that they actually had landing pages that end up matching what was actually in the ads. They didn't have that before. Most of their ads were leading directly to the homepage. Some of you have probably done this before when you don't have a lot of marketing people and you just have to get something out the door, you end up sending traffic directly to the homepage. But it's important to note that if that homepage isn't optimized and it doesn't relate at all to the ad content, then you're not going to have message alignment. And ultimately people are going to bounce off the page thinking they got to the wrong area. So it's another thing that we did a lot of in the beginning is making sure that, especially for search, making sure that we had the right types of keywords and headlines matching up with ultimately what people were searching for so that we got them the content they needed, boosting quality scores and all sorts of things like that. So that's that side. And then channels is kind of
Maybe
the third.
If I can just interrupt you before we zoom in on channels, because
go ahead.
I'm interested to know if you go back to the, you mentioned you nailed the ICP, you did some customer research. So what I would like to know is, like, did you have like different segments that you were considering, and how did you map that to the messaging? How did you map that to the landing pages eventually and the, the campaigns that you were running?
Yeah, it's a great question, because what we did is they initially didn't have segments. Segments didn't exist. It was just a big group of people, and they put it in the back end of LinkedIn and they said, hey, great, all these titles, all of these industries, all these functions, et cetera. They put it all in there, and that was that. And all the message was the same to everyone. So what we did is we initially decided there were really only just two key segments that we wanted to hit for these guys specifically. And that was a more technical audience, which was security, compliance, engineers, those types of folks, where we had basically in that featured outcome messaging doc, there's a segment breakdown. And within that, what we did is we broke down the messaging by the various segments. So obviously engineering had different wants and needs for what they wanted out of the product, as it pairs to some of the C-suite, like the COO, CFO, CEO, the founders, et cetera, which they get a lot of folks that come in inbound in those titles. So we had a much different message for both of those folks. So really, and ultimately I'll say this, I mean, this is not all on us for it's just to come up with all the messaging positioning for the company. That's not what our business predominantly, we help and support that, right? But this ultimately comes from the client. So for all of you, I mean, with any agency you bring in or any consultant or anyone, you need to understand these things enough from a customer's perspective to figure out what that ultimate message is going to be resonate with those folks. And then ultimately someone on the outside can help put that together in a very, formatted, unique way that's really going to resonate with those different segments. But that's essentially what we did, is we just broke it down into two. We had two different types of messages broken down into various different types of subsets where we like A/B test those messages, see which one was getting more engagement, et cetera. And then obviously start driving more of that message home once we realized what was really catching on, what people were most interested in around the product, and then tied that all back into the CRM so we could understand, hey, what's really driving pipeline, not just top level engagement within the ad channel. So,
right. So this is something that we see very often, like probably one of the biggest mistakes is the company base their messaging on their assumptions, on maybe some internal discussions on their product or whatever, instead of really basing it on their customers and just interviewing the customers and figuring out why they bought the product and what kind of value that brings to them. And the other thing is, like you mentioned, is like generic messaging, which is also like a big leak in the funnel, if you like. If you just like have one message for everybody. So I like that a lot. And maybe going back to where we kind of stopped the breakdown of the campaign, you were talking about, landing pages and, keywords and search and etc. And now you mentioned, and that I found very interesting, is like driving the traffic that actually brings revenue. Can you a little bit elaborate on that? What exactly do you do there?
Yeah, a really specific detailed point on search, for example, is I'm literally going into the CRM and I'm looking at what keywords are actually converting well for the funnel. I mean, that's one easy thing everyone can do literally right now on the call, is go take a look at what keywords are specifically converting into pipeline, into revenue, and start thinking about doubling down on those keywords. Now, I'll say that with a grain of salt, right? There's obviously a lot of things to take into consideration, but that's one thing that we look at, and we bring that data back to our team, right? So a perfect example of this, where I see this going wrong a lot of times, is a lot of marketers are not going into the CRM to take a look at what happens. They're looking in the ad channel. They're saying, hey, look, we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more conversions. It looks like this keyword is driving a ton of conversions. Let's up our bids and start spending more money on this, increase our impression share on this given keyword. But the thing about that is that keyword maybe doesn't have a lot of intent around it. Maybe a lot of people aren't even converting to pipeline. They're driving leads. Yes, they're getting form fills, but ultimately they're not moving through the funnel. So just because the CPA or CPL is lower doesn't necessarily mean that it's where we should spend more of our money. And that's a really important point. I'd be comfortable paying more money for a given keyword that's more competitive, but that ultimately converts at a much higher rate through my funnel and ultimately drives and connects with pipeline and revenue, because that's what we're responsible for. And at least with all of our clients right now, luckily we work with a lot of great clients that do align with pipeline and revenue, and we're not really aligned with any type of MQL number, at least right now. So that's something pretty actionable.
I think there is a kind of a point or nuance to that, because I can imagine for somebody who is running, Google Ads, you have all these things there, and I think is it not a little bit scary? Like you're dropping. I think there is somebody talking.
Oh, yes, under there.
Yeah, can we mute everybody, Andre? I'm just going to mute.
Mm-hmm.
Can you mute him? So sorry. So basically, isn't it a bit scary? Like you have all these different ads, maybe they're running right now, and some of them seem to be like, especially the way that Google reports it, you have actually them, a CPA, how many leads, everything seems fine. But then you look deeper and you realize they're not generating revenue, they're not generating even pipeline. And now you have to go to maybe some like long tail, very competitive keywords. You're spending a lot of money. You're not getting that much results that are at least visible in the ads. And you have to also wait for some time before you see that these are converting, that they are actually. So how do you go about that? How do you move people from that, place to the place where they're comfortable in doing things like that?
Totally. Well, before you even get to that point, to your point, you've got to make sure that you align with how you're measuring success of marketing. That has to be done. And if you're not on the same page with your CEO on how you measure success of marketing, then already you could be potentially set up for failure. For example, if you're set up to drive the lowest CPA and the most amount of leads, and let's just say you're just running search, just to keep this a very simple example, you're just running search. If your two goals are get the most leads for the least amount of money, then it's not going to make a lot of sense for you to do what I just said, because you haven't set expectations yet with your CEO or with whoever you end up reporting to that's setting those measures of success, to align that ultimately our goal is not just to get the cheapest and the most, it's to get the best. And still, if we can do it efficiently, that's fine. We don't want to completely blow out our budget, but we want things that actually convert ultimately into pipeline and revenue. And I think I'd go back and I'd say to that CEO, I mean, ultimately, like, hey, I know you want leads, but look, I'll show you a report right here. We're driving very, efficient leads through the funnel. We're driving a lot of them. We're meeting our target, MQL goals or whatever the metric that they're using. But listen, like you look at the funnel and these are not converting. And you show them that. You show them the report and you show them the data. And then you go back and you say, I want to try something else. And especially on search where, predominantly, depending on, your keyword strategy, going after words with intent, you should be able to prove out pretty quickly, hey, listen, if we start actually bidding on some of these keywords that, are actually converting, and you look at that in the back end of your CRM and you start picking out those keywords and start doubling down on them a little bit more and get that time to say, hey, listen, let me prove this out. And then you track it down through pipeline. And again, if you've got a long sales cycle, fair enough. Maybe revenue is a harder metric to prove initially. but you can definitely start looking at pipeline. And usually for most companies, I mean, you should be able to convert a high intent lead within a few weeks. So, you're looking at running that program for, a month or so, maybe a little bit more, especially on search. Now, paid social is a very different game, but on search, you could probably prove that out. So again, I think it just comes back. The summary there is like, you got to make sure that, you're aligned with like how you're measuring success and what those metrics are. If you're not, then yeah, that would be a completely ridiculous strategy to kind of go off and just do that immediately, because you could potentially get yourself in a position where you're putting yourself in danger.
And so you mentioned something like, especially if your sales cycles are longer, you may have to wait longer before you actually can show that there is revenue coming out of that. But are there any other like leading metrics that you can be looking at while, waiting to actually generate revenue from your campaigns?
I think the ones, I mean, again, like I try to keep it pretty simple. I mean, there's there's so many metrics that we can look at as marketers, and we love, finding more. Ultimately, the best leading indicator is that I've got a firmographic fit, inbound demo request with intent, filling out my form from search. I would look at also qualitative data. How are those calls going? Talk to the sales team and the SDR, get the feedback directly from them. How are the calls going? Another thing that's really interesting too is, when you go into the CRM, the biggest question I always have, and any CEO asks, is why are the leads not converting? Why are they not converting to pipeline? So what you can do, and most companies have a normalized field for, reason not a fit, you could call it. There's 1,000 names, but you set up that normalized field and have the SDRs, the AEs, depending on what your lead to sales rep handoff looks like. You set up that field and then you start reporting on it and trying to understand, hey, why aren't they moving through the funnel? So there's a lot of things that you can do, at least initially, to say, all right, are we hitting on kind of some of the right notes here? Is this make sense? And then ultimately, depending on how quickly things convert from lead to pipeline, you should be able to get pipeline numbers in not too long of a period, right? Especially on search or any channel where there's a captured channel. So yeah, those are hopefully some actionable things that people can take away there.
I like it's very simple. It's look at the inbound leads, that's focus on that, and not just leads, but actually quality inquiries with a good fit. So makes a lot of sense. Now you mentioned search. What are some of the other ways that you're driving pipeline in this case?
So in this case, I mean, again, the big thing that we did is, so we started out predominantly they were doing heavy, referral, getting a lot of referral leads through like G2 and Capterra and things like that, search. And then a little bit, I'd say SEO, but I'd almost call that, more long-term than anything else, but still they were driving, just some solid leads there. But the other ways that we were creating pipeline is, ultimately we started reaching a point at one point where we were just really kind of maxing out our capability on a search perspective. The volume we were kind of capturing a lot of the volume that we're looking for. And this is happening literally right now. So now the discussion that we're having internally is we need to kind of start shifting more dollars to creating demand and increasing the amount of volume that comes into the company. So we've just started doing that a lot more now over the last few months, increasing budgets around LinkedIn, playing with Facebook, Reddit, interestingly enough, but definitely more LinkedIn, Facebook, to try to, number one, make people aware that, for the folks that, for example, have never, been exposed to this problem before, are aware of actually what's going on, that they actually exist and that this is a problem. So there's a whole strategy around that. And then there's another strategy for the upstream clients that we're targeting now, which we've broken it out into, again, those two segments I just mentioned to you. One's kind of the C-suite folks, others engineers and security. And then we also have kind of a further breakdown of that based on the size, because there's a little bit of a different message for folks that are a little bit more mature companies that are used to this, understand what the problem is, versus those that don't. So we've broken that down into two different segments as well, so that then we can say, hey, we've got a really strong message that's going to resonate with the more mature mid-market companies, and then bring those in. So again, on paid social, I mean, just to talk about what we're doing there, I mean, we're in a very lucky position that this company did not come from the traditional kind of like decade old, driving tons of MQLs through gated content. So luckily we did not have that battle. We had kind of a blank slate, if you will. And we started by going in and distributing content on LinkedIn. That could be a combination of case studies, positioning statements, product marketing. So going back to that feature to outcome doc, making sure that we're putting kind of the want and the desire of what someone's looking for and creating a story, trying to tell that story very efficiently within the channel so that they can consume that information there. They don't necessarily have to click and go out. So it's really important when you think about 99% of people are not clicking, 1% are. So you need to do a really good job about educating those people in channel as much as possible. And over time, what we've seen over the last 3 months is that we're driving more and more inbound demo requests through the funnel. Now, do we have direct attributable, leads to the channel? No, there's a lot of holes in that, but we know because we're hearing it from the SDRs and hearing it from the sales team about how they're hearing about this company. So those are just some other ways that we're thinking about doing that. But there's a whole lot of different programs that they're running. But those are some dimension on the paid social side.
Okay, because this is very interesting, and I think we need to kind of break it down a little bit, unpack it, because you mentioned that there's you're running. It's kind of like the other way around. Like we would be optimizing for conversions, we would be optimizing for conversions maybe on your landing page or maybe on the lead form, etc. And now you're saying, no, you're actually kind of optimizing your ads for people who are not even engaging, for people who are just reading, like you said, 99% of people who are just reading. So like, how does that work? Like how do you, what do you have to focus on to make this effective?
Oh, I think it gets down to, what is the story that you're trying to tell and how can you tell that in the shortest amount of words? And whether it's through, just getting tactically here, whether it's through just a static image ad or a carousel, doing a couple of different, image, pieces of creative that say, what does the buyer want, right? Align with that and get their interest. And then go from there into saying, here's how we can help and actually solve that and make sure that they can consume that information all within the channel. And I mean, I'm making this sound easy. It does take some time because you've got to really figure out, what that message is, but they should be able to capture most of it within the actual creative, not even the ad copy. And if they can capture that in the creative and read that either through just one static image, piece of creative or a carousel ad or something like that, then you're getting down the road. And over time, what you're going to do is you're going to drive more engagement because they've now consumed that information. When your ad comes up again, they may be, ready to kind of take that click because now they're a little bit more exposed. And ultimately, this is about frequency, right? And getting in front of these people enough times with a similar message, switching that up and getting their attention on it, and then driving them back into the funnel when they're ready is the key part. And not just trying to kind of convert these guys right immediately off and, put CTAs that say get a demo when there's legitimately no intent in LinkedIn or little to none. So, you've just got to make sure you know how to run the channel and expect the right results out of that. So.
Okay, so let me just get it straight. So you were running some search based on, focusing on the keywords that from CRM, actually converted to pipeline and later to sales. Yep. That was going well. You were getting good results, but at a certain point, you kind of hit a ceiling. You're in terms of the volume. You couldn't scale this more using this strategy. So then you started doing. Is that like driving demand by sharing these kind of ads that you just mentioned, sharing these kind of insights on social, on LinkedIn primarily, I believe, and you mentioned Facebook as well. Mm-hmm. And as a result, because you said you were hitting ceilings, did you see some increase in volume after you had increased the spend on these channels?
100%. That's exactly where we saw it. Now where we didn't see it is really important to say. Where we didn't see conversions is we did not see them in LinkedIn.
Okay.
And everyone might panic like, oh my God, where are the leads? I'm not seeing the conversions go up in my LinkedIn account. Based off of what I just said and how we are running it, you are not going to see a lot of leads come in directly through LinkedIn. You're just not in that type of approach. If you need this, yeah.
You were seeing a big increase in terms of the inbound inquiries that were coming then, via the website, SEO, search, or
exactly
search ads, right?
Exactly. You're seeing them coming in direct, organic, and branded keywords. You're seeing a lift there, and we can see that right in search. So we saw significant lifts in branded keyword terms, as well as direct and organic, and then also the conversions. Of course, we track through the funnel as well, and we were seeing good conversion rates to the funnel. They have, I believe, if I remember my numbers correctly, I think they've got a lead to op rate around 60% right now. That's grown over time. And then they've got a lead to customer rate of around 25%, which is, in my opinion, I mean, I don't know a more outstanding numbers. I mean, those are very good. So they've got a very good sales team, very efficient at kind of moving deals through the forward. I think also too, the hope is that because they're now doing a lot less outbound and they've got a lot more inbound demo requests with firmographic fit, that the sales cycles are moving quicker, that the conversion rates are better. And I mean, we've gotten to a point now where literally the sales team said, we don't even have time to do really outbound anymore because we've got so many inbound demo requests coming in. So, I mean, I think that's a perfect position. I mean, that's exactly what you want your sales team to be saying is, listen, like, this is great. This is awesome. Like, these are a good fit. And, you know, there are some that aren't, right? You know, we'll certainly get feedback on that. And we'll make little pivots and changes. But overall, I mean, they're driving extremely high conversion rates of the funnel from an inbound perspective. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do.
I think Andrei wanted to ask a question here.
Yeah, there is one more question that is coming from our community, from Vishal, and he is asking how to increase website demo conversion rate. Doesn't matter from what channel traffic is coming. And I believe we all will have different thoughts on it, but to be honest, this is the goal of this conversation. Whenever you are doing demand generation programs, you are thinking about warm traffic or accounts that are somehow aware of your solution, of what you're doing, of your product message. So by default, generating demand means that you create interest in your product. And that's why the next part, of course, is that this is something that the point where we kicked off this conversation, you need to have this vertical positioning. Your product message should be adapted to that vertical, which is absolutely true. If you are talking in your content about completely different, let's say your content is dedicated to one challenge or one person, and your website copy is dedicated to completely different person, completely different vertical, then you'll have problems. But at the same time, I would love, before I will give a mic to you, I would love to highlight one critical point here. Companies that have problems with, let's say, generating demo calls for their sales rep usually overcomplicate their sales process. They they don't put lots of details about their product. They are not willing to share product features. They don't want to do product overview. They put this long, complex form, which is pretended to be a qualification form. And then you just fill it in and pop-up appears. Thanks a lot for your inquiry. Somebody from our team will reach out in 48 hours, something like this. In this case, sales process is definitely broken. So you need to, before thinking about how to increase this website conversion, take a look at basics. If all good is there. So these are my points. I believe you can.
I love you. I'll just go off right off of that. Yeah, that you said some good stuff. I want to hit on one thing though that I think is really important that you said, and correct me if I'm a little bit off on this, but what I heard from you is talking about making sure that you make it really easy to understand what your product does and how it works on your website, and being very clear and transparent as much as possible so that you make it very easy for that person, whoever hits your website, to understand what it is, how it works, who uses it, and answer all the key W's, right? And I think that's a really big one. And there's some companies that I think, most people are immediately thinking, well, I don't want to give them everything, right? Because if I put everything on my website and I show them my demo ungated and I don't collect their information, well, they're not going to come in. They're not going to have questions for me. Or I don't want to put my pricing on my website because if I do that, then the leads will go down and I won't get as many leads for my sales team. So all these things are real concerns for sure. And I totally get them. But at the end of the day, decades ago, right, in the 80s, 90s, even in the early 2000s, I mean, sales had a lot of power, right? Because they controlled a lot of they controlled the information. They had access to the product. They knew what was going on. If people needed to learn about something, they would call up a sales rep or someone at the company to learn more about it. So conversion rates were a lot better because people had to reach out. There just wasn't this kind of transparent, nature. There wasn't social media. There weren't as many people talking, et cetera, maybe in different channels. So the point is like now consumers have so much information. And to your point, Andre, I think you said it very well, is that, you need to be the person that basically delivers and offers up the most information. And ultimately you're going to win. And when you've got, for example, many little product video demos, ungated, allowing them to understand what it works, how it is, explain that in the customer's mind, transparent, easy pricing to look at, forms that are very short, easy to read, using tools, third-party data providers to enrich that so that you can fill out less forms, et cetera, and just make that really, really easy for them. You're ultimately going to drive more inbound demo requests that are higher quality because people will qualify themselves out. They'll feel like, okay, yeah, I really understand what this is. This is going to be a great fit for me. So it's really important to say, and I think it's a great point. So that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, I love it. I think you nailed it.
I mean, yeah.
We had two more questions coming in. And one
Stefan would love to jump in.
Okay. Let's hear it because that was one of the questions. So Stefan, go for it.
Hey guys, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, everyone. Andrew, Vlad, everyone else, Dan. Hey Jonathan, nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
I got a question. I was listening to Demand Gen Live was last week, and they touched with Dave Gerher. They touched a very interesting point, which was attribution in the dark social, which is basically attribution and like you're not going to get quality leads from always from paid. There's going to be an amount of groups, again, LinkedIn, where you can't do the attribution. Now, my question is the following: if you do LinkedIn, you do AdWords, and the sales cycle is quite long. How do you manage to do the attribution in the right way? Well, there is no right way. How do you manage to do the attribution so it makes sense for your clients? So, for example, you're testing 15 different keywords this week, and at the same time, you're starting a new campaign on LinkedIn. How do you measure the attribution of each channel in, let's say, in those demos or SQLs that you're bringing in?
Short answer is we don't. We don't. I mean, I think the key point here is, I mean, do I think companies should be using some level of attribution software? Do I think that you should be looking at what leads are attributable to what channels? Yes, of course, 100%. It would be irresponsible not to look at that. But at the end of the day, what you see in those tools as it compares to what you actually, hear about people saying how they heard about your company are two different things. And I think that's really important to remember that, it's not always going to be the same. What LinkedIn says, for example, the way I just ran it would tell you that you should turn off LinkedIn right now because we're not looking to drive a whole bunch of leads directly from LinkedIn. We're trying to use LinkedIn as a channel to educate, build awareness, build urgency in the mind of the consumer. And when you run the channel that way, you're not going to get a lot of attributable leads. So when the CEO or someone says, hey, like, what's the deal? Why are we continuing to invest in LinkedIn? Right? You're going to say, well, we're looking at overall inbound demo requests up by 40%. We're seeing those across direct, organic, and paid search. But I'll tell you what, I know that LinkedIn is hitting all of these people. I know that it's influencing and driving more because as we spend more money on these channels, we're driving more people into them. And I think, again, this takes always alignment from the top, right? And sometimes if people don't get this and they want to drive a channel specifically up, then you've got a problem there, and you've got to get them educated that the fact that, to your point about the dark funnel and what they talk about in Demand Gen Live is completely accurate. That people, especially for example, putting what we started doing for a while with some of our forums is putting in like, how did you hear about us, right? And it's a great way to correct some qualitative information, get that in, make sure that you understand it. Then you tell them, and you look at the CEO and say, hey, look, like LinkedIn's saying this, but we've also got our forums saying this, and then we've got HubSpot saying this. So the point is like you'd never really rely too much on attribution software because it can lead you down the wrong path. You trust and understand that, hey, these are the channels we need to be engaging with. These are the channels that we need to be engaging with our folks on, et cetera. And the results will come. And again, I'm always looking at the aggregate amount. I'm looking at the overall inbound funnel. And if I'm driving more hand raisers to the business, we know that we're doing our job, right? And ultimately, obviously, conversion rates and all that through the funnel. So hopefully that answers.
We had another question from Nick here. And just before I dive into the question, I wanted to mention to Nick and everybody else, Jonathan mentioned in the beginning that he will be sharing his own like template sheet that you're using to map the features to outcomes and generally define the messaging. We can also share some resources about how to create an ICP. I think Andrei created a really good guide on that. But nevertheless, I think it's an interesting question to briefly touch upon. Is he said, maybe you already mentioned, but can you expand on techniques used to build the ICP? and this especially I find interesting, and any challenges or pitfalls in that process that have to be overcome.
The challenges in building an ICP, you're saying?
Yeah.
For a B2B SaaS company?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think ultimately it comes down to this. I mean, you know, this is the typical part where we start is, you know, number one, we take a look at the CRM and we understand, you know, we just get a pulse on what's converting, what's not, where are these people, what industries are they in, what titles are they in, who are the people that are initially starting the conversation with us, what titles are they? And then we start looking obviously at, you know, ultimately who's converting, right? Is the ultimate metric, is like who's actually putting money on the table saying, I want this. So we start looking at that eventually. But ultimately this comes from an understanding from our customer to understand, do they understand their customer deeply enough to just nail it and say like, no, we've been doing this for a while. We know that they have this problem and these are the specific criteria that we need to go after. So, I mean, honestly, it's between that and then leveraging data to then test that theory. If it's early stage, if it's a more mature company, usually that's pretty hammered out. They've looked at the data over the course of time. They know this is their ICP. It really shouldn't change a lot unless they change their go-to-market and decide to move upstream and or mature their product. And again, that moves them into different addressable markets. But that ICP should remain pretty consistent once you nail it. In the beginning, it's about, again, the CRM, looking at the data inside the channel, who's engaging with that content. For example, we just actually did this exercise with this company that we're talking about right now. Very interesting. But we basically were taking all the different job titles and we were trying to understand who were the first people that were actually converting on the website. What titles were they? And the data was really interesting because we were actually had made some conclusions about biz dev and sales being very influential and important and folks that we should be actually pushing this message out to. What we found though is that, you know, really none of them were actually coming in to talk with us. It was actually a completely different group of people. And they really weren't as involved in the sales cycles themselves. They were, you know, tertiary types of people that needed to be involved at some point, but they weren't the key people. So instead of spending money across, and this comes back to our point, Vlad, about, you know, making sure that you're spending your money wisely, not across too many different segments and spending it across the people that are actually going to end up coming into your funnel that are going to meet firmographic criteria. Once we did that, and did that exercise, it was eye-opening to us. And again, the only where this data lived was the CRM, by the way, just to say that again, it wasn't in the ad channel, it was in the CRM. So it requires everyone on this call to go in, understand what's going on in there, and then adjust obviously your marketing accordingly, and then make adjustments. But you know, there's just at least some things I'd say immediately on that.
So kind of summing up, look at a CRM, look at like who is generating most revenue, who are the best clients, right? Trying to understand the different roles, different industry segments there, and really like nail that. What we do always in addition to that, if there's no recent interviews with clients, we'll then go after those, you know, best clients that you've just identified in the CRM and do interviews in that research, basically talking to the people from this company to figure this out. But what I also found interesting, what you mentioned, is you then use these criteria, how you use those criteria to narrow your targeting also in the ads. And I remember you mentioned in our in the call that we had previously that your cost per lead went from $270 to $460 after you did that. But at the same time, that the customer conversion rate, so the win rate at the end, right? What matters, and overall the quality went up 25%. Is that correct?
It's 100% correct. Yeah, it's a wild thing, and most people would panic, right? Like, you know, holy shit, we doubled our CPA. You know, what's going on here? You know, we need to get this under check. But you look through the funnel and you realize, wait, this isn't a problem. We're hitting targets. We're hitting pipeline targets. We're hitting revenue targets. Maybe this isn't a big problem. And in fact, leads, of course, because we were dealing with still the same amount of budget, right? So if we're paying more per each lead, you know, we had less, but we still had firmographic fit, high intent leads coming in because these are true hand raisers that want to talk to sales that are converting at a high rate. So, you know, again, it's all about, you know, deciding what you're measured upon. And that's the key part. And again, you know, there's that, you know, gap that needs to be kind of merge between how you're measured today and where you want to go in the future. And it's really key that you don't just rip the Band-Aid. Lots of people on LinkedIn, myself included, everyone's talking about ungating everything and just doing these things, but you don't just make that decision and move over immediately. You still have to get the whole entire team aligned with what's going on and, you know, make sure that you've got one core measure, which ultimately should be revenue. So,
all right, I think this is a great intro into the other case that we were discussing, and I think we can just, have a little chat about it as well. And I think it's interesting because most of our listeners are B2B companies with long and complex sales cycles, high ACV, maybe companies busy or active in specific industries like manufacturing, construction, etc. Right? So I remember that you had another case that was more like that. So can you tell us like how a program, the demand gen program, would differ for a company like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess for some background around it, just to give some like high level metrics so people can relate. So we're talking about, ACVs are like 100,000 to $500,000. Sales cycle, I think, is around 267 days. So almost a year long or so sales cycle. We're talking about very complex. So a lot of different, people that need to be involved ultimately to get the deal done. So we're talking potentially anywhere from 15 to 30 different people that potentially have to be touched. Now, maybe not all those are in the actual deal itself, but these are tertiary people, again, that have some influence on how things are moving. So a lot of different people to keep in mind. Some other things to note too, before I kind of go into what we did about this, is they were a very heavy MQL, type of typical model, right? Where they're driving content downloads, trying to get people into a email nurture sequence, and then they're waterfalling them down through. So, you've downloaded X amount of content, they put a little tag on there through Pardot, then they give them X amount of emails around that, and so on and so forth, and just kind of moves to the flow. Then they're lead scored, and then they move into an SDR for follow-up. The thing is, when we went into that situation, we started looking at the conversion rates. And of course, to no surprise, many of them just were not even moving anywhere. Now, if you look at a long enough time period, yes, ultimately, a lot of them were firmographic fits. And yes, over time, if you look past a year, or 2 years, some of them actually were converting. But the point is that, how much did that really have to do with that person converting or not? And, can you really wait that long? So, it was really moving them from that model. And I think we aligned very early on that we were not going to be driving the same types of strategies as before. We were going to switch it up, and we were going to move from gated content. We were going to start ungating it. And we aligned, by the way, not just by ungating it, we aligned with the CEO and made sure that he had an understanding that we were going to be running this way and to expect a lot less leads. Leads are going to go way down. And that's going to be the case for the at least short term. But over time, we're going to ultimately start driving higher quality people coming into the website, raising their hand. And that honestly was a difficult kind of conversation that we had to have with them. But ultimately, when we look at the data, what they currently were doing today was not converting as many people. Predominantly, they had focused most of their deals on outbound. So it was a lot of outbound sales and doing that. So what we did is we went in, and the first thing was they had a TAM of around, I believe, 2,500 accounts. They went after manufacturing, construction type companies, et cetera. So we first got with sales, and then we got a immediate target account list that they were actually going after on a monthly basis. So what we did is we somewhere between 10 and 25 accounts, and this is kind of an evolving beast here with these guys, but 10 and 25 accounts on a rolling basis that we decided to do significant research on. These were targeted by the sales team themselves in combination of that and marketing. Didn't use any intent-based data on this. I know a lot of people are probably using intent-based data. They haven't quite had the budget to kind of move into that. We're probably going to move that direction eventually. So all of this was really done by just manual research and understanding which accounts might be a better fit. So we created that list of around 10 to 25 accounts. Again, we had the sales team, or rather marketing, wrote custom emails and sequences for them to actually go after from an outbound perspective. Then we had search, LinkedIn, Facebook were the three channels, no display and no video right now. But those are the three channels that we used from a targeting criteria to go after those folks and start bringing a message out to them that was really going to resonate, along with, by the way, at the same time, not just doubling down on 10 to 25 accounts per month, but also still at the same time, we had firmographic targeting that met their ICP, because we wanted to still build up momentum, build up brand and awareness, educate them on what the company was capable of, et cetera. So both those were running at the same time, just to be clear. It wasn't like there was an all focus on just these 10 to 25 accounts. You can't just do that. You need to have a broader approach, make sure you're still getting the frequency up so people are still familiar with your brand. So ultimately what we did is we said the ultimate measure of success here is just going to be account activation. And account activation was when someone decided that they wanted to meet with us and then ultimately become an opportunity. And that's what we tracked. And honestly, at this point, this is the only weird thing about this account that we decided to do is we didn't decide to draw a line between who did what. If sales got the initial meeting or whether it was marketing, it didn't matter. This was all about being on the same objective. Ultimately, we're aligned with revenue and we want to activate more of these accounts and get them on board. So we did that. We've so far generated around, I think it's 3.5 million. I'm just looking up my spreadsheet here, around 3.5 million of marketing source pipeline. And then overall, not including just marketing source, just like overall from sales and marketing, 4.7 million. So, quite a bit of pipeline that's been in a time frame of around 4 to 5 months or so. And obviously, as you know, the sales cycle is long, so don't really have any revenue numbers to share around that. Those will, of course, I'm hoping come. They've got a decent win rate through the funnel, so we're hoping that kind of maintains its case. But we're still driving firmographic fit accounts, activating around 2 to 3 accounts per month, which is pretty good for them, given that the size of these deals are just massive. So that's I guess a little bit of high level. I'll stop myself there. Maybe if there's any questions on some details there, but that's how we initially started putting that together.
Okay, so with these 25 to 30 rolling accounts, as you call them, you're actually running in parallel. You're running targeting based on firmographics, but based on a broader ICP, like in the other case that you explained, right? And you're running specific campaigns targeting these accounts. And do I understand correctly, you're running both outbound and ads, kind of like air cover or similar, actually similar approach, but then very targeted at those accounts?
100%. And honestly, what we've seen too, it's really interesting, is since we've started doing this, outbound conversion rates have increased substantially, which is really interesting. So we looked at the historical conversion rates off of outbound. I think they were sub 1%. What does that mean? What is a conversion? Conversion is someone that's positively applied to an email and agreed to a meeting. I think we're now, I'd have to look at the numbers again. I don't have these up in front of me because I don't have access to this data, but I think we were up at 3 and 4%. In terms of positive replies. And again, you can just see that, there's a lot of things obviously in factor here, but you can see that since we've started to align that and go after the exact same accounts, so those conversion rates are much higher. So again, you always have to remember, and I think everyone knows this probably on the call, but all these channels impact each other, right? So, and we've seen this across multiple different accounts where outbound is always a piece of the puzzle with every single B2B SaaS company that we work with. And every time we start, engaging and running the types of programs that we're running across, whether it be search and paid social, we see that increase. So, yeah, it's so far it's working. Always little optimizations, but yeah, so far so good.
But what is kind of like common in between those two cases is like there were a number of steps that started running these different ads, and then after a while, people started to, whether proactively come to the website, fill in the form, or responding to those outbound emails in the second case. But I wonder, like, how long should you wait before you start seeing these kind of results? Well, you mentioned like 6 months to double the marketing sourced revenue, but how long on average do you think people should be waiting to see that demand generation program is actually working and we are seeing some results?
There's a lot of it depends around that, because there's, it depends on the category you're coming into, depends on the maturity of the company, how much brand is actually out there in the market right now. Are people aware of your solution? Are they unaware? Is it a known problem? Things like that. But, in general, for most of the B2B SaaS clients, this is a broad average. We're looking to drive, 30, 40, and 50% increase in marketing source pipeline within 3 to 4 months. Mm-hmm. So usually pretty quick. Revenue obviously is more of a lagging one. So in the longer sales cycles, clearly, we're not, those are taking whatever they're taking based on the sales cycle length. But in general, we should be able to see that pretty quickly. And even before that, we're looking at, 2-3 months, to start really seeing that inbound demo requests are starting to pop up a little bit. Again, that's a slower one, right? So, it's not like that's instantaneous unless we're talking about search, especially on the paid social side, to really start seeing the net effects of that's something longer term. Because remember, we're going after people that, are not necessarily in market looking for your tool right now. And that's really important because, ultimately, if you're just going after capture channels and going after people with intent, you're going to hit a ceiling there. And the person in your category that's actually creating demand and driving brand, et cetera, is going to be the one that's thought of first. And you may get the scraps out of that, which is what a lot of companies do. They focus all on the capture channels. They don't focus anything on creating demand. And then what happens is they're left with the scraps. So, you really need to, first obviously hit the targets on the capture channels, make sure you can do that, prove to management that you can hit a number. And then after that, start investing in some of the other channels, and especially the dark funnel, moving into, organic LinkedIn, podcasts, communities, other events and things like that, where, you can start building a lot of awareness there too. So.
All right. So my question, I think you kind of answered it. Let's say there's definitely some lag. There is, like you said, maybe 2 or 3 months before really starting to see those results. But I can imagine that in some cases there is some pressure, there is some, as you and I'm sure that also as an external consultant, you also want to make sure that they see the results as soon as possible. And I think you mentioned already one of these ways, but are there some other, like focusing first on the captured, but are there some other ways in which you can kind of speed this up or get some quicker results, or what would be your advice there?
I think, always, if we're talking short term, then we're talking capture channels and people with intent. So the way to get shorter term results, so we're focusing on, outbound email that's looking for people with intent. Who's interested in this, right? We're looking at, search. We're looking at review sites and getting those things both churning. So in the short term, like that's where most of your investment's going, especially early on. Most folks don't even have the budget nor the content. Again, depending on your stage. If you guys are seed or maybe even Series A, sometimes you don't necessarily have a lot of the content or even someone in-house to even build that out. So before you start, running a program like that, get the capture channels working. Those should provide results pretty quickly. Again, assuming that there's already some intent for what you have in the market. That's a really key point. If you've got something new and very innovative, people are unaware of what it is and they don't really know they have a problem, you're going to have to spend more money to actually build up demand because there isn't demand for that product. But if you're in a situation where, the market's aware of it, it's a known problem, but you're just doing it a lot better than the competition, 100% double down on those 3 channels, you'll be able to hit, shorter term results quicker. But know that, again, there's a cap to that and a ceiling, and that eventually you're going to need to build up those other channels, and whether it be through, other social media channels, communities, events, other things like that, combination of that, as well as paid social strategies that I've been talking about on this call. Those things are going to be needed done sooner than later, and the sooner the better, because again, it's not like, oh shit, we hit the ceiling on search and we're just not really getting the same amount of volume of leads we thought. Well, now let's turn on some other channels and see what we get. You're going to train yourself that when you turn on LinkedIn or Facebook, and if you run them the way I'm talking about, you're going to get very disappointed, and the budget's going to immediately crawl back, and it's going to go back to search, review sites. Sometimes people, start investing more in SEO, et cetera, for organic leads, et cetera. But anyway, these things are all important to kind of think about.
And you mentioned outbound. So the campaign you described for the for the second case where we're talking about the much higher ACV, the rolling accounts, 25, 30 accounts per month, and getting 2 or 3 of them activated. Like, would you describe that as well as an approach that gets quicker results, or at least in terms of activation, obviously, because these are big deals?
Mm-hmm. In that case, I wouldn't say quick results. So 2 to 3, I'm giving you this after some months of going at this. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily quick. I would say that over time, though, as we've gotten a lot better at it, because initially when we started this, they'd never done this before. There wasn't a lot of coordination between sales and marketing. So to be honest, it was a little bit messy on the get-go of it. So there were a lot of things. So not to try to sell a perfect story to everyone here on the call, but things were a little bit messier in the beginning. But after we kind of got better at making sure that we were always going after the same accounts, we improved the messaging, et cetera, to some of the ICP, because again, one of the biggest struggles they had too was positioning and messaging from the beginning. So we really had to kind of nail that. So I'd say not short term, still looking at, something like 2-3 months to really kind of get up to that point where we could hit, 10 to 25 accounts and have 3 of them end up being activated and turned into pipeline for us.
All right, so we are coming up the hour, and I still had like 2 questions that perhaps will be interesting for our audience, and some of them I remember on our LinkedIn post we're asking about this. So the first one is, you and Andre had a chat about friction, right? So friction in the sales funnel. So what would you say are the most common causes of friction and how to remove them?
Well, I mean, one is not putting pricing on your website. That creates friction. One is not giving ballpark pricing even when you're on a call, assuming you don't have it on your website. That creates friction. Another is when you pass off the SDR to AE pass off, creates a lot of friction there. So, I mean, a lot of people just hate this. I know this has been popularized back a decade ago and everyone seems to do it, but you know, a lot of times if you're passing like firmographic, like high intent ICP leads to an SDR and it's a CEO, and it's nothing against the SDR. They're great people. They're doing a very important job. I was an SDR way back in the day. So it's a very important job, but that pass off, a lot of times they're asking the exact same questions. The SDR is asking the same questions. Those questions don't get past the AE, then the AE asks the same questions again. By the way, what did they do when they first clicked on the website? They said they wanted a demo. And they still haven't gotten it. Now they've waited 3 calls between all the scheduling, 5, 8 days maybe have passed. Guess what they're doing? Talking to your competitors. They're talking to other people. And if your competitors are making it easier, if they've got product demos that are on the website, potentially ungated, they've got transparent pricing, they're giving them more information. This goes back to Andre's point, which I thought was just spot on. If you do that on the channel, then you're ultimately going to just drive way more people into your funnel that actually want to buy from you. And those other people are going to fall out because you've now created friction. So I know we're almost at time, but I'd leave it there. So
all right. And Andre, you were coming online.
Yeah, I just wanted first of all to say thanks a lot for sharing all these brilliant insights. What I love about these full funnel talks is that we can discuss practical campaigns, involve community, answer the questions all the guys have. So thanks a lot for joining us. And meanwhile,
100%.
I would love to ask our folks, how did you like this conversation, guys? Keep in mind, this is not a webinar. This is just our regular meetup. So feel free to come up, ask your questions. We love when you are joining the conversation. So please share in the comments, how did you like it? Was it helpful? Was it valuable? Your feedback is much appreciated.
Yeah, and definitely let me know, guys, if anyone's got any follow-up. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Jonathan Bland. Look for me there. I do posts probably every week at least. So if you guys want to grab some time or direct message me on something, happy to chat marketing with anyone. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think it was kind of a masterclass in demand generation with a lot of practical insights. I think things that we can even start implementing right away. So thank you.
And just a second, guys, keep in mind that Jonathan is giving a talk on our upcoming Full Funnel Summit. So in the chat, I dropped a link to his talk. So sign up for his session. I believe you'll love it. And again, thanks a lot, guys, for showing up. I believe that's just the first meeting after launching our Slack community. So every week, just expect that we'll host something for you. Thanks a lot, all of you, and see you next week on Full Funnel Summit. Cheers.
Thank you.